Who would have won the 2021 college football playoff had the field been expanded from the original 4 teams all the way up to 12? Welcome back to the channel, guys. In this video, we're going to be going over the hypothetical scenario of what would happen if the college football playoff was expanded to 12 teams. We're going to be going over the 2021 year. Here is the original 14 bracket for this year. Alabama won the SEC, they were the 1 seed. Michigan won the Big Ten, they were the 2 seed. Georgia was the loser in the SEC championship game, but they did enough to get in as a 3 seed. And then Cincinnati, the first and to this day only group of 5 team to get in the college football playoff. They finished at 13-0. They got the 4 seed. Notre Dame finished 5th, and Ohio State finished 6th. So, what would happen if the field was expanded from 4 teams all the way up to 12? First off, here's how the seeding would have been. And we're going to start off with the number 1 overall seed. There would be absolutely no change to this. The Alabama Crimson Tide will be your number 1 overall seed in this. 12-1, SEC champ. Only loss was that incredible game against Texas A&M in the first week of October. I do believe that was the first loss in 100 straight games where they were the ranked team and they lost to an unranked team. That set an FBS record long before that. 100 straight games over non-ranked opponents. That streak was ended, but Alabama did enough the rest of the season, even with that 4 overtime scare in the Iron Bowl to Auburn. They won 24-22. They finished 11-1, made the SEC championship game with only 1 loss. Then they absolutely destroyed Georgia in that SEC title game. That game wasn't after I think they're losing 10-0, and then Alabama just went on a 5-touchdown spree. They won by 17 points over the Bulldogs. Other wins they had was against really good Mississippi team, Ole Miss, and against Arkansas. They won by 7. So they had about 5 teams ranked in the top 40. Obviously won 4 of those, including the number 1 overall power-rated team in Georgia. They did enough to get the number 1 overall seed in this tournament. The number 2 seed in this, again, no change, Michigan Wolverines out of the Big Ten, 12-1. First time they beat Ohio State since 2011. Only the second time they beat them since 2003. So that was the biggest program-changing victory of the Jim Harbaugh era. Team started off pretty good. They started off 7-0, I do believe, 7-0. They had that first time they won at Wisconsin. That was the first time they won as an underdog on the road in the Jim Harbaugh era. They won pretty convincingly by 21, 38-17 in that one. And then they had that massive showdown at East Lansing against Michigan State. They had a 16-point lead in the second half, and they gave it up. Kenneth Walker game, he had 5 touchdowns, all-time legend status. But they actually did enough down the stretch. Michigan State lost to Purdue and then lost a head-to-head to Ohio State. So Michigan got some help from Sparty losing a couple times. And like I said before, they beat Ohio State, won the Big Ten East for the first time ever. And then in the Big Ten championship game against Iowa, they demolished them 42-3. It wasn't even a contest. Michigan played 5 teams in the top 40, won 4 of those. They won 2 games in the top 3 games against teams in the top 15: Ohio State, Iowa, and Wisconsin. So they did enough as the Big Ten champion to get the number 2 seed in this 12-team bracket. The 3 seed would go to the 3rd highest rated conference champion, and that would be the Cincinnati Bearcats. In real, they were the 4 seed, but in this one they're going to get the automatic qualifier as the 3 seed. They was easily, in my opinion, not say easily, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, group of 5 team we've seen in the 10 years of the CFP era. Only other team that came close was the 2017 UCF squad, and they produced a lot of pros in this one. This team, Cincinnati, did enough what they did with their schedule, and they were well deserving of this 4-team playoff. They beat Notre Dame on the road by 11 points in South Bend early on in the season. That was easy. If they wouldn't have got that, there's no way they would have gotten the original 4-team playoff, because the rest of the strength of schedule was pretty weak, as you see. Only one other team ranked in the top 40, but that was Houston in the AAC championship game. They won by 15. Houston finished at 12 wins for the season. They were not a bad team at all. Only other loss they had was to Texas Tech at the first week of the season. Then they won 11 straight to get to the said AAC championship game. So other than that, pretty easy schedule. Had a scare against Tulsa, but either way, analytic-wise, they were 22 in offense, 14th in defense. Outscored their opponents by over 20 points, just exactly 20 points a game, and they would be your 3rd highest conference champion. It would get the 3 seed in this 12-team bracket. The 4 seed, the last team to get a bye in this 12-team bracket, would be the Big 12 champion Baylor Bears, 11-2. Only 2 losses were to Oklahoma State, who finished 6th in the power ratings, and a bad loss to TCU, who finished with a losing record, 56 overall power ratings, lost by 2 on the road. But Baylor did play a really hard strength of schedule overall. 9 of the 13 opponents they played were ranked in the top 40, including 5 in the top 20. So four of the opponents that they beat in the top 20, two of those being against Oklahoma. The second week of November, that was one of the biggest wins in program history. And then obviously they beat Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. I do believe they forced at least 4 turnovers in that. Spencer Sanders and the Pokes did everything they can to lose that game. And it comes down to the game of inches. If you guys remember the epic goal line stand on 4th and goal with about a minute left in that game, Oklahoma State ran a sweep to the left. Baylor knocked him out just before the pylon to the game-saving tackle. And that ended up being just enough for the Baylor Bears to win the Big 12 championship. And they get the 4th seed and the last team to get a bye in this 12-team playoff. Now, the 5 seed, the first team at large, first team to get the highest rated team would be the Georgia Bulldogs. The team that started off 12-0 was absolutely dominating every single team they played. I don't think that team was within 2 touchdowns the entire season. The closest game they had was against Kentucky at home. That was 30-13, as you see there to the right. And the only reason that game was close was because Kentucky went on a 13.5-minute drive in the 4th quarter. Georgia only got the ball once in the 4th quarter. They were already up 30-6, so that kind of cut it to 17. I take it back. Only game that was really close was the first week of the season against Clemson. They won 10-3. Both teams had really good defenses, but Georgia had the pick 6, I think, in the first half, and they held Clemson to under 250 yards of total offense. But the rest of the season, they just dominated opponents. They had 3 other shutouts, including their rival Georgia Tech, before they met their first demise of the season to Alabama, 41-24. I don't know what happened in this one. They are up 10-0 in that, and then Jamison Williams to that. Bryce Young, Heisman winner, just prolific offense, just took over, and they just exposed Georgia in the secondary, and they just whomped on them. So Georgia started off as one of the hottest teams in the entire country in the last decade. Had one of the best defenses, if not the best defense, of the CFP era. They got exposed in the SEC championship game, but they did enough the rest of the season easily to earn the first at-large bid and get the 5 seed in this CFP playoff. The 6th seed, the next at-large team, would be the Ohio State Buckeyes. Only losses were to Oregon week 2 at home, and then that last game of the season at Michigan, 42-27. Michigan just kind of took Ohio State's will in that second half. In that game against Oregon, they were not good against defending the run. So both losses were to teams that ran the ball pretty well off tackle to the Buckeyes. But the rest of the season, teams that did not have a good secondary and defense, Ohio State just absolutely exposed them. I mean, look at these scores they put up. 59 to Akron, 52 to Rutgers, 66 to Maryland, 54 to Indiana. They put up 33 to Penn State in a really good defensive game, 59 against Purdue, and then the epic game against Michigan State, 56-7. That game was 49-0 at halftime. C.J. Stroud had 6 touchdowns in the first half. That game was an absolute debacle. Michigan State was a top 10 matchup, and that game was over after the first quarter. I mean, 49-0 in the first half. I think it was 28-0 in the first quarter. Kenneth Walker was held to less than 50 yards of rushing, and he got hurt in that game. Ohio State just whomped at Michigan State. So the aerial attack for Ohio State is one of the all-time greats. Their offense was just absolutely insane. But when it came to the weather games or teams that just controlled the clock, a la Oregon and Michigan, they could not handle it. So, but the resume speaks for itself. Their offense is one of the greatest in the CFP era. They did enough to get the 6th seed in this 12-team bracket. The 7th seed goes to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, 11-1. The only loss they had was to the 3 seed Cincinnati Bearcats at home, 24-13. They only played 2 other teams that are ranked in the top 40. That would be pretty good teams, though, in the Big Ten, Purdue and Wisconsin. That Wisconsin game was only a 1-score affair heading into the 4th quarter, and then 2 defensive touchdowns later, they won 41-13, pulled away. That was a neutral site game in Chicago, so it wasn't even a home game. That early game against Purdue, 27-13, Purdue turned out to be one of the more underrated teams in the country. They upset Michigan State, and they held Notre Dame to a pretty decent game too. So Notre Dame had that really close game week 1 against Florida State, and then they won by 3 against Toledo before losing to Cincinnati first week of October. But they won the rest of their games. They won a close one at Virginia Tech, which, again, a night game at Lane Stadium. No matter what the record is for VT, it's going to be a tough environment. Won by 10 over UNC, pretty good game. And then that was probably the best game down the stretch. Kind of played easy, but their resume speaks for itself. They only one loss was to one of the best teams in the country, and they did it. They won the rest of their games, so they did enough to get the 7th seed in this 12-team bracket. They get a home playoff game in the first round. Finally, the last team to get a home playoff game in the first round would be the Big 12 runner-up Oklahoma State Cowboys. Again, inches away from that finishing 12-1 in conference champ, and I do believe if they would have won in real life, they would have. I think they would have hopped Cincinnati to get that last 4 spot in the CFP playoff, but the committee was not going to take a 2-loss team over an undefeated team, no matter what the circumstances were. That's why Cincinnati got in over Baylor, and why Oklahoma State ultimately dropped from the 4 seed all the way, or the 5 seed all the way down to the 8 seed. But just like Baylor, they played in a really tough Big 12 conference. Their schedule was just absolutely stacked. 9 of their 13 opponents ranked inside the top 40. They had that close win at Boise State, 21-20 early on in the season. Had another. Look at all these wins they had. Kansas State 22. They beat Baylor before they lost the rematch, 24-14 at home. The only other loss was to Iowa State on the road. Iowa State, even though they lost 6 games, they were still rated 19 in the power rating, so that's a very tough matchup on the road. West Virginia at 39, Texas Tech at 38, and then they had finally beat their rivals in Bedlam, Oklahoma, 37-33. That was a great game, one of the all-time great games of the CFP era. Again, that's close, lost by inches to Baylor in the Big 12 championship, 21-16. They still were one of the best teams in the country, especially on defense, and they did enough to get the last first round home playoff game in this 12-team playoff. They will face the 9 seed, which would be the Michigan State Spartans, a team that started off 8-0 before they lost to Purdue. Actually, 8-0. They beat Michigan in an epic clash, 37-33, before they fell on the road the very next week to Purdue, one of the biggest juggernaut, giant killers of the last decade. I think Purdue had the most wins as an unranked team over top five opponents. They beat the Michigan State 29-40, and then next week they beat Maryland, but then that game at Columbus, 56-7. I mean, like I said before, with Ohio State, that game was 49-0 at halftime. That game was not even close. Michigan State just absolutely got annihilated. When you have the last rated pass defense in the country, I mean, and you're facing a team that averages close to 300 yards passing a game, you're going to get exposed. That's exactly what Ohio State did. And Michigan State, how easy their first half of the schedule was, they still faced 4 teams in the top 40, beat 2 of them, including they win over Penn State and Michigan. So that was enough of their resume to get in this 12-team playoff. Added a 2-loss team out of the Big Ten. They get the 9 seed, go on the road to Stillwater to face the Oklahoma State Cowboys. The 10 seed, going on the road to South Bend to face Notre Dame, would be the Ole Miss Rebels. 10-2 out of the SEC. Lost to Alabama 21-42. Lost at Auburn 31-20. They did have good wins against 9-win Arkansas and 8-win Texas A&M. Both won by at least, beat A&M by 10 points, and then that classic game against Arkansas where I think there was 4 touchdowns scored the last 2.5 minutes. That was a great game to watch. Other than that, though, schedule was pretty easy. Even in the SEC schedule, Tennessee was 44th, LSU was 42, Vanderbilt and Mississippi State not even in the top 40. So how easy their schedule was, they still beat their two opponents that are ranked in the top 40. And I mean, those are the teams put in front of them, and they they won all the rest of their games. So that's all you can ask for in the SEC team. They finished 10-2 and get the 10th seed, go on the road to South Bend, face Notre Dame. The 11th seed, you go on the road to Columbus to face Ohio State, would be the Pac-12 champion Utah Utes. Team that started off 1-2, kind of left for dead. They had a close loss to San Diego State, not on the Mountain West. They lost to BYU by 9 points. And even after a couple of decent wins over Washington State and Arizona State, they lost again to Oregon State by 8 on the road. But then they just finished off the season 6 straight wins, including 2 over the aforementioned leader, easily Oregon. They destroyed them. The first matchup, they were up 28-0 at halftime. They ended up winning 38-7. And then 2 weeks later, in the Pac-12 championship game rematch, they faced the same Oregon team, which they won again, 38-10. Those 2 games weren't even close, and Utah was just playing lights out down the stretch. They destroyed Stanford. Like I said, they beat Arizona by 11. They destroyed Oregon twice, and they beat Colorado. So this team was one of the hottest teams in the nation, even with 3 losses. to finish out the season, and they did enough as the second to last Power 5 champion in the 11th seed. They go on the road at Columbus to face the Buckeyes, so that'll be an interesting matchup. That'll be one of the real-life matchups as well. Finally, the last team in this 12-team playoff, the last conference champion, would be the Pittsburgh Panthers out of the ACC. A team that finished 11-2, had the early season loss, out of conference loss to Western Michigan, which was very surprising. They are an 8-win team out of the MAC, but still rated 72 in the power ratings. And then they had that midseason loss to Miami, Florida. But as you see there in the middle, they beat Clemson to end their streak and basically end their run as the ACC representative for the last 6 years before that. And they won their last 5 games, including the overtime win over North Carolina, beat Wake Forest in the ACC championship game by 24 points, 45-21. Kenny Pickett was a monster in that game, and they finished hot, just like Utah. It's one of the best teams, hottest teams, and they get in the last team in this 12-team playoff as your ACC champion. They go on the road to Athens to face the Georgia Bulldogs in the first round. So, conference champions: Alabama, the SEC, Michigan out of the Big Ten, Cincinnati out of the American, and Baylor out of the Big 12. Those are your top 4 teams. Then you had Utah out of the Pac-12 and Pittsburgh out of the ACC. So those are your 6 conference champions. Let's see who wins this 12-team bracket. We're going to start off with Oklahoma State versus Michigan State in the first round. I think Oklahoma State's defense prevails in this one. They're going to shut down Kenneth Walker. I think he still scores a couple. I don't think he has another Michigan game against Oklahoma State. Their defense, some of the games they got exposed, but at the same time, I think their defense is top 3, top 5 in the entire country. I think they beat Sparty, Michigan State. Move on to the second round, the quarterfinals, to face Alabama in the Verbo Fiesta Bowl. Georgia versus Pittsburgh. This wouldn't be a bloodbath. I think Georgia would win at least by 3 scores. I think Kenny Pickett's team was really good on offense, but the schedule they played, why the ACC was so weak, why a 2-loss Power 5 champion was dropped all the way down to 12 and actually needed to win their conference to be the last team in this. Their borderline would have been out if it weren't for them not being conference champ. That just shows how weak the ACC was in general. I think Georgia's defense would have just shut them down. It might even be a shutout in this one. I think they win by at least 21 points, if not way more. Georgia moves on to the quarterfinals in the Sugar Bowl to face the Baylor Bears. Notre Dame versus Ole Miss. I think how good Ole Miss offense was. I think Notre Dame was still another team that was borderline about to get into the CFP playoffs. As we saw earlier, they finished as the 5 seed, just under Cincinnati. They were not going to put a Cincinnati team or hold out a Cincinnati team, a team that beat Notre Dame on the road in that 14 playoff. But they were the next best team in the 5-team bracket. I think they would have still dropped to 7 in this one, but either way, they would have beaten Ole Miss, and I think they would move on to the quarterfinals to face Michigan in the Peach Bowl. Finally, the first round matchup, Ohio State versus Utah. I think this would be a repeat of the game in real life. I think Ohio State would go back and forth. That was one of the all-time classic games, I think, in college football history. I honestly put that game top 10. That Rose Bowl game against Ohio State and Utah was a classic. But I think Ohio State would still prevail in this one, no matter what the circumstances were. And they would go on to the Rose Bowl game to face in-state opponent Cincinnati in the quarterfinals. So, moving back up to the quarterfinal game, the Fiesta Bowl, Alabama versus Oklahoma State. I think Alabama would be at least a 7.5-point favorite. And honestly, who I think would win this game, I think we would see a massive upset with the Pokes going over Alabama. Heisman winner Bryce Young and Will Anderson Jr. I think their defense was just playing at another level down the stretch there. I think Alabama, how they got exposed, they didn't get exposed. They had a lead against A&M late in that game. And the way they played against Auburn, it didn't set with me the right way. Yeah, they destroyed Georgia, did not have any secondary, but Oklahoma State, I think, had a much better secondary than Georgia going into that. You could say Keely Ringo had his pick 6, but Oklahoma State had a better secondary, in my opinion, than Georgia did. So I think the Pokes would actually pull a massive upset against Alabama in the quarterfinals, and they would move on to the semifinal game in the Cotton Bowl. Georgia versus Baylor. I think Georgia once again moves on. I think Baylor, this game would be like a 28-10, 28-14 kind of game, 31-17, whatever it may be. I think Georgia, it would be a low-scoring affair. The first half, first 2.5, 3 quarters. I think Georgia pulls away in the end. They just hammer the ball, sets a bet it with their receivers, eventually comes up clutch again, and they do it just enough to pull away late in the game over the Baylor Bears. They go into the semifinals in the Cotton Bowl to face Oklahoma State. Michigan versus Notre Dame in the Peach Bowl. I think Michigan would eventually beat Notre Dame. I think it would be a ground and pound matchup. I think this would be a very tight, close game. I think Michigan would only be a 3.5-point favorite according to Vegas odds. I think they would only win by 3. I think this would be a field goal game down the stretch. Notre Dame's style of play was just so similar to Michigan's in this season, but I think Michigan would just have just enough with that ground game with Corum, Haskins, and Edwards, and McNamara, playing what do you call it? Just ball control football. Aiden Hutchinson, Ajabo on the defensive line. I think they would be the difference makers in this very close game. Come up with some clutch plays, clutch sacks, and that would be the difference. And Michigan moves on to the semifinals in the Orange Bowl. The in-state rivalry against Ohio State and Cincinnati, it was very difficult for me to try to pick Cincinnati over Ohio State in this one, and I still would take Ohio State in this one. I think talent-wise, I just think how good of a story Cincinnati was. Did they belong in the original 14 playoff? Definitely. Their resume spoke for itself. Was Ohio State just a better team than them, no matter what they lost 2 games? Yes. Would Ohio State win this game because of their talent? And yes, but I think it's more of just, the style of play and the matchups. I think Ohio State would beat Cincinnati, and they would move on to a rematch in the semifinals in the Orange Bowl against, the game against Michigan. And that would be one epic rematch clash in this one. So, of the top 4 seeds that make this, only Michigan was the only one that moved on to the semifinal round. So we got Oklahoma State versus Georgia in the semifinals in the Cotton Bowl. This would be a very low-scoring game. I think it would almost be like a repeat of the Clemson-Georgia game in Week 1. I still think Georgia would win this one, and I think it would be like a, honestly, 20-10 kind of game. That's honestly how good the defenses were at both sides of the ball. Georgia would just make enough plays, so they just have more talent, and they would come away with the victory and go on to the national championship game, where they would face the winner of the rematch of the D game, Michigan-Ohio State. Everything in me wanted to say, if there was a rematch of these two teams on a neutral site field with both teams healthy, I think I would want to take the Buckeyes. But my homer in me and just every power analytics part of me just wants to say that Michigan just overcame the mind games and the mental strain that Ohio State had on them for 2 decades, and they would beat them again in a rematch. I don't think it would be 42-27. There's no snow, but I think they would still ground and pound, and Michigan would still come away with a victory to beat Ohio State and move on to the national championship game. So, the real-life game of this one, Georgia won 34-11 over Michigan in the national title game. Do I think it would be a repeat of this? No, especially after the extra 2 games each team would have played. I don't think it would be a rematch of this. I think Michigan would be a lot more hyped for this. Do I think the end result would be the same? Yes. I think Georgia would still be your 2021 national champion, finished 16-1. They just had more talent at every single aspect of the ball in Michigan, and besides the end, they were just better than. No matter what you want to say about it, Georgia was just the better team overall. They came up with a perfect game plan against Michigan the first time. I think it would be a similar game plan, and they would just come up with big play after big play, and I think they would beat them by at least 2 scores. And Georgia, with that all-time great defense, would be your 2021 12-team hypothetical national champion. What do you guys think of the video? Do you think certain teams should have been in this? Do you think other teams should be left out? Who do you think would win it with this field in front of me? Let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for the future videos of this hypothetical series that I'm doing. Up next is the 2022 season, so I'll see you guys for that one.